Welcome to the First Team College Football Recruiting Show with former NFL QB Matt Sims, Irish Breakdown recruiting analyst Ryan Roberts, and former college long snapper Joe DeLeone.
We're back here on the First Team College Football Recruiting Show. It has been a wild National Signing Day. The past 2 days have had a lot of movement that went down. Luckily, we waited until Friday for everything to settle, and we're going to talk about all of those major moves that happened for the major programs, all the craziness, all the unexpected decommits, flips, commitments, everything. We're going to be going over it. I'm Joe DeLeone, joined by former NFL quarterback Matt Sims, also founder of Sims Complete QB. Joining us as well is recruiting analyst Ryan Roberts, which good thing we have Ryan here because we've got some craziness to talk about with Notre Dame recruiting. And we're going to get to that really soon. Folks, if you're joining us on YouTube, the audio version, make sure you hit that subscribe button. If you're tuning in on Stadium, go check us out on YouTube. Anywhere you can find a podcast, The First Team, search that up and you can find us. Guys, we have to start off with the main storyline. We've got 5 storylines that we're going to talk about today and recapping things that people might have missed. But the main one that created so much buzz in a situation of something that has never happened before, in an unprecedented measure in the era of NIL, is what happened with star safety Peyton Bowen, who came into the day expected to commit to Notre Dame. He ends up last second flipping to Oregon, does not sign his letter of intent, and now he is headed to Oklahoma. Ryan, I want to give you the floor here really quick just to kind of explain the timeline of events here, but everyone is talking about this because of the wild nature of it. Dominated the news cycle. With some other craziness, this dominated the news cycle.
Yeah, I mean, from a Notre Dame perspective, it's extremely unfortunate because it kind of took the celebration part of the day away from a lot of the commits that did commit to Notre Dame, right? The 24 players that committed to the University of Notre Dame, but it was one of the more bizarre recruitments that I've ever seen personally. I mean, I think of this is mirroring sort of to Zach Evans when he was coming to North Shore a few years ago, when he silented to Alabama, then delayed his recruitment, then flipped late to TCU, and they'd never really had much conversation at that point. So kind of the brief backstory is Peyton Bowen committed to Notre Dame last December, late in December, privately, went public after the new year. So he was committed to Notre Dame for almost a year, 11 and a half months. And there had been rumblings throughout the recruitment as far as him taking visits, reaffirming his commitment. Leading up to the day, I mean, just last week, I would have guessed that he may have decommitted and flipped to the University of Oklahoma because Oregon and Oklahoma had made some pitches behind the scenes that may have been too attractive for him to go away from. But coming into the event, he had kind of reaffirmed that commitment to the coaches and the commits behind the scenes. And despite that, he decides for Oregon, obviously, on that first day. And then you're just kind of thinking, all right, well, that was weird, but it's over. Well, it wasn't over. Never sent in his national letter of intent. Then later that night, there was some rumblings about it maybe still being Notre Dame. Oklahoma comes back into the picture. And then ultimately the next day, I think it was at around 2 p.m. Eastern time, he finally puts out the graphic that he's committed to the University of Oklahoma. So it's been wild, man. Ultimately, if it wasn't going to be Notre Dame, I expected it to be Oklahoma. So he got to the end result that I would have predicted if he did not end up with Notre Dame. But it was just the series of events leading up to that was it was daunting, man. It was a lot of moving parts, to say the least, down the stretch.
Yeah, a lot of moving pieces is the easiest way to describe that. And a dramatic series of events as everyone was waiting for and expecting, where is this kid going to sign? And a lot of changes in that decision ends up leading to Oklahoma. I mean, Matt, your thoughts though on this, because it's a difficult decision to make. I had my own signing day. Matt, I know that you had your own signing day. It's a difficult decision. So what do you think maybe went through Peyton Bowen's head, and what are your just thoughts on the situation in general?
Yeah, I mean, as a person that, mentors and coaches young football players right now currently in high school that are making this transition for college, someone that's also been through it personally myself, you just can't stress enough to all the people at home just how stressful this situation is, and also the collateral effect of the stress involved with it. And, we all know that behind the scenes, you have the athlete, but then you have the athlete's family, you have the athlete's extended family, you have, other people that are around that group that have huge influence. And it's a daunting task nonetheless, even though you have the world in front of you and so many opportunities in front of you to pick the right school, which potentially could help project you into greater fortunes for yourself and for your family for years to come, that can change generational things to your family. I mean, even my father, right? I mean, we were, a family that was below, average means in Kentucky, and my father made it, was a great NFL superstar with the New York Giants, and changed the fortune of our family forever because of his career. And I think that's what happens in these situations with these young football players. You get in this environment and, man, everybody knows how close you are to that like cherry on top moment, and everybody wants to add their 2 cents to it, and can really cloud a young man's judgment, in such a crucial situation in their time. And hopefully it works out best for him despite all the craziness. And I think Ryan makes up a great point too. It's really unfortunate this craziness kind of took away from the great moment of the Notre Dame guys that did commit, that stayed true to it. So that kind of lost its, shininess. But other than that, I mean, I just want to continue to stress everybody at home how difficult this is for these young people to make this decision that has such impactful things on their lives.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great note, Matt. I said that note on the Notre Dame class because, although it didn't end the way you would have wanted it to from Notre Dame's perspective, still the highest point total in 247 era history since 2013. So it's still a really great class for Notre Dame. It's just I wish that they could have gotten a little bit more of their moments in that situation. But I would just say, like, I agree 100% with the sentiment of this is a tough decision, right? It's not easy. And a lot of people are tugging at a guy like a Peyton Bowen because he's a 5-star player. He's phenomenal, man. Go back to our safety show to hear our opinions on him. He's an incredible talent. He's going to be a really good football player on the next level, in my opinion. And when you have teams like Oklahoma, Oregon, Notre Dame, and a lot of others that are tugging at you in the NIL era that we live in, which, let's be honest, it's not fully NIL. There's a lot of pay for play that's happening right now, which is not the definition. Yeah. And I mean, if I was a 18-year-old kid going to play major college football and someone dangled money in front of me, I would listen, right? And I don't think anybody can't blame anybody for
it. Is the backlash worse because of Keon Keeley and how that played out? Does that add to the sting of the moment? It's like we lost Keon in the 11th hour, and then it's like Peyton was just like rubbing salt in the wound.
A little bit.
So we were going to end up talking about the Notre Dame class at the end of the show, but let's just jump right into it now.
Let's do it. Let's go.
They ended up getting 24-star commitments. So like Ryan, you pointed out that their class was one of the highest rated ever for a Notre Dame recruiting class. And like Matt, to your point, it's weird because they lost a couple of guys throughout the cycle, and they had all these big commitments at the beginning of the cycle that put them at the top. Mm-hmm. And then everyone's kind of chirping throughout the process, oh, they're not going to stay there. They're going to get jumped. The money's going to come into play. And then everyone provides their input on, well, Notre Dame's got to start offering the bag if they want to get these kids. Notre Dame has a different set of values than other programs do. But regardless, like I think that there is that sentiment from losing Keon Keeley was the big one, but then now losing Peyton Bowen is going to mar people's thoughts on this class, even though it's a really talented grouping.
I mean, yes, I agree 100% with that, because when I look at this class, I'm like, Notre Dame didn't miss on any need across the board. They still brought in 3 safeties, brought in 2 corners, 3 linebackers, 4 defensive linemen, 5 offensive linemen, a tight end, 4 wide receivers, a running back, and a quarterback. You hit every single one of your needs, right? And you got good players, good to very good players across the board. But from a national perspective and from some Notre Dame fans' perspective, it is going to tarnish the class slightly because you missed out on 2 5-star caliber players who have a higher floor than maybe some of the other players, right? Because some players in the class, it's like if they hit, they're going to be stars, man. A lot of upside in the class for Notre Dame. But the thing about the Keon Keeleys of the world, the Peyton Bowens is not only do they have high ceilings, they have high floors too. Like those kids could come in day one and they could help you out, right? Keon Keeley could be a star. Peyton Bowen could be a star day one. And I think that's the difference, Joe, is that you still have all the upside in the world in Notre Dame's class. It's just you lost out a little bit on the sure thing, the floor, the 5 stars. That's more, I think, what people miss with the whole 5-star thing, right? 5 stars, immense upside, obviously. But there's a lot of 4 stars that have just as much upside. The reason that guys are usually 5-star caliber players is because not only do they have that upside, they also have a high floor. They're more of a sure thing than most 4 stars are.
The other thing that's constantly forgotten throughout this recruiting process too is that player development is, I think, equally as important. We saw last year, Texas A&M hauled in a historic class, the best class ever. And we're going to talk about the Alabama one this year that rivals that class. But one thing that after they signed all those players, a bunch of them hopped in the portal. They had a terrible season, and most of them are either not returning. Those guys are not developing at the rate that you would hope for them to do so. So look, a top 10 class is a top 10 class. It's still a really good grouping. How those guys are developed, how they get onto the field is far more important than if it's a 5 or a 4-star. And again, that is something that is easily forgotten on National Signing Day because people in the message boards, the dorks that sit in the message boards, are screaming and yelling about, well, we've got this 5-star and you did not. And I think that again, is something that is constantly missed on when having these discussions on recruiting classes.
Well, a lot of it is just being, you just want to have the feather in the cap, right? You just want to say, hey, man, look at this, another feather in the cap, for our program, stuff to talk about, stuff to kind of talk smack about to your friends, when you're going and watching other games. The thing to keep in mind, right? And I think, Joe, you're hitting all these points. Ryan, so many great points as well. Notre Dame is going to have to be that program where they do hit home runs with certain recruits, but then the other half, it has to be guys that are developmental and really hit their ceiling a year or two from now. Yep. And that is just the brand of Notre Dame football and kind of what they need to be. The interesting thing going forward too, that I don't think, Notre Dame is going to tap into this more going forward. Notre Dame is a national product. Mm-hmm. It's a national product. There's a reason why they have a deal with NBC and why NBC promotes their games, right? Because they are bigger than a lot of other schools and their fan base is like a Dallas Cowboys-esque. So eventually I do think that the NIL world and all of that just will kind of connect at one point. They just haven't quite figured out how to maximize that yet, the way that some other schools like Alabama have yet.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. And I mean, you're seeing movement on that end with the creation of collectives, like Brady Quinn is heading one, obviously. So Matt, I think they're actively trying to solve that problem, right? Because Notre Dame understands that they can't throw upfront money around like some schools can, right? They just can't do that based upon some things behind the scenes, right? But the creation of collectives and the education of how to use your money, I think, is a big thing too, because one thing that we miss is that last year, Michael Mayer and Isaiah Foskey, who were great players for Notre Dame, were 2 of the top 10 most lucrative players in college football. They made a lot of money off of NIL deals. I think it's just education and then the continued evaluation of collectives, I think, is going to be a big part of that conversation.
For sure.
Absolutely, guys. And not to spend too much time on Notre Dame, they were a team that dominated the headlines because of the craziness that happened. Yep. Every article that I read had Notre Dame as a loser. But the big winner.
They're a winner. They're a winner.
Yeah.
Right. The one that I think was also considered to be in every outlet, every podcast, every show that you listen to, that was considered to be the biggest winner of the day was Oregon, who came out of nowhere with some massive moves that they made throughout the day. Now, they did end up losing out on Peyton Bowen, which was a major factor in them taking an ascension for being suddenly a top 10 class. They did still pull one of the top edge recruits in Mateo Uiagalelei, who is DJ Uiagalelei's little brother from St. John Bosco, and then Dalen Austin, a cornerback who's in the class, Jurian Dickey, who we've talked about. They also managed to pull some of the top transfer players. Justin Jacobs, a linebacker from Iowa, who Ryan and I have talked about as a potential day one pick as a linebacker if he's properly utilized. A Johnny Cornelius, who from my alma mater from the University of Rhode Island is a transfer player who you stink. Is a transfer player, a very talented player, and was the best transfer tackle in the class who had a ton of offers. And they also got Trayshawn Holden from Alabama. So this is a massive, massive haul. The reason why they finished in the top 10 was because of those transfer portal moves, some of the last second moves that they got on signing day. This overall is a very impressive class. Dan Lanning was smoking a cigar after as he was just relishing in the success that they had. Frankly, the Ducks, man, they're on the move. As USC and UCLA move out, those classes that they had were okay, but Oregon's the real winner at the end of the day out west.
Yeah, I mean, they did a tremendous job. It wasn't perfect, obviously, because like you said, Peyton Bowen ends up not signing. They lose Dante Moore. I know they replaced him with Austin Novosad, but that's, a little bit of a downtrod as far as the quality of quarterback play. But they still signed a lot of great players from a recruiting perspective. They also got a couple of nice transfer players. You mentioned Jacobs and Cornelius. So I think that Oregon is a team that, look, when Oregon is headed in the right direction and they're playing well, they're kind of a cool team, right? Like we know about the uniforms and kind of, Oregon's a beautiful place and they have that opportunity to be a little bit different of a program. So I think that they bring a lot of intrigue and a lot of attractiveness to recruits. And I think that's what you saw, man, is that they have a lot of resources that recruits will find attractive. So getting guys like Mateo Uiagalelei, Austin Novosad to replace Dante Moore, Jorian Dickey finally to sign the day after. Like they pull a lot of really good recruits in this class, a lot of nice transfers. So I like what Dan Lanning's doing, man. He was one guy that I fully admit, and I admitted probably like 2 months ago, I was a little wrong with that hiring at first. I was a little worried about that fit and just what he would be able to do out at Oregon, being an SEC guy, like a Southeastern guy, but did a nice job in year one, in my opinion, doing a nice job in the recruiting trail. Seems like the Ducks under Dan Lanning are heading in a very good direction.
Yeah, and I think overall just hitting major points within their recruiting class of just needs right away, adding depth to their football team. I think really the biggest takeaway from just Oregon's situation here in this recruiting trail is just the fact that they crushed it in the transfers. They have guys that are proven commodities, that have experience, that will be into the lineup from day one, making an impact. So that's where I feel like Oregon going forward is probably going to be one of those teams that finds that balance every, portal season where it's like they do well with recruits from high school, and then they mix in, a handful of guys too that are transferring and coming to them that way from another school, and I see this being a normal recipe for success for them going forward.
Yep. And I think they hit key parts too, right, Joe? I mean, you mentioned getting Austin Novosad after the Dante Moore thing, I think was big for them. Getting a Johnny Cornelius as a grad transferred offensive tackle, getting Mateo Uiagalelei, who's projects as a defensive end. Those are three of the most important positions on a football team. So getting caliber players to where they got at those spots, I think was big for the recruiting class and just the roster construction in general for them.
Yeah, and Austin Novosad is an interesting prospect too. I think he's a guy that has an extremely high ceiling going forward. Mm-hmm. He's still maybe not quite as physically electric as Dante Moore is, who they've had. Yep. But nonetheless, I think Austin Novosad does a lot of good things. He has a twitchy arm. He definitely has a high ceiling for sure. He's 6'4", 195 pounds, so he's going to continue to grow into that frame. Would like to see a little bit more mobility from him. He looks like a good athlete, but doesn't really show it enough in film on the field. But nonetheless, they did replace, a great quarterback with a really solid quarterback that can be great down the line for them.
I have a comp. Do you want to hear a comp with Austin Novosad, Matt?
Let's hear it. Yeah, okay.
Because Notre Dame recruited him for a little bit. Okay. And he reminds me of Jared Goff, man. And people think that that's a negative, but Jared Goff is a really good college player, and he's a good NFL player too. Like that's kind of what I see in him. He's kind of,
I don't know. You're right. I mean, Jared Goff just gets like whatever end of the stick for some reason. But listen, he plays well. Yep. The end of the day, the reason is because he doesn't make like those sexy wow plays that we've come accustomed to with so many of the other great quarterbacks in the NFL. Yep. But he will be that guy 10, 15 years from now where, you'll be talking to a young football fan. He'll be like, who's Jared Goff? He'll be like, oh, he was solid football player. Yeah. He just wasn't like the best guy of that generation because he's with, a bunch of freaks.
Yep.
He's not Patrick Mahomes, but he'll still get the job done. And it's kind of funny paralleling those two things because like some people think that Dante Moore is that Patrick Mahomes, highly explosive, big play threat. Not a direct comparison, but like
those throwing out terrible comps today. Love it.
Yeah,
I'm saying the more flashy quarterback compared to the one that's going to keep things a little more level. But Novosad's a really underrated ad for them for Oregon. But I think the main thing here to pay attention to with Oregon, Ryan, you said it. They're a cool team. They're a fun program to pay attention to. They've got all the uniforms. They also, it doesn't get talked about enough, they've got some of the best facilities, one of the best stadiums, one of the best game day environments in the country. Because of the connection that they have to Phil Knight and Nike, that really helps them. And there's no reason that they shouldn't be throwing around the most money in NIL deals because they have all of those available funds that they have from Phil Knight. And heck, it's easier for them to say that they're not doing it as an inducement because you can get these kids to sign Nike deals and to participate in ads, various things. I don't know if that's what the approach is, but regardless, they have the resources, they have the money. Oregon should be recruiting at this level. And I think next year the expectation is for them to finish in the top 5.
And now they are just the pinnacle of their conference going forward.
Yes.
Like you mentioned, now that UCLA and USC are leaving, they are really just the show in the Pac-12 going forward. And every week it'll be about them and their conference and not, everybody else.
Yep. I mean, it's a really attractive program because like you said, Joe, it's beautiful out there, man. It's beautiful. They have great facilities. And I mean, I remember I don't know if you were too young for this, Joe, because you're like 10 years old, but like,
Shut up.
Man, do you remember the Marcus Mariota, like Chip Kelly era, man? You remember that?
Yeah,
like,
man.
I was still not born yet. I don't remember that. Yes, I remember that era.
You were -3 when Mariota was.
I'm only not that much younger than you, but regardless, yes, that was a fun time. And you think that UCLA is trying to turn back into that because Chip Kelly's over there. Maybe that's part of the allure for Dante Moore and why they were able to get him. But I think that they're a different kind of fun. They're smacking teams. They've got a really good, well-coached defense, but they're paralleling it with a really good offense. It remains to be seen how they perform without Kenny Dillingham because he is one of the best, brightest offensive minds in the country, and he's now going to Arizona State. But, regardless, though, they're fun again. They seem to be a lot more fun and exciting again.
Agree.
I want to quickly bring this up, guys. I didn't throw this into the notes, but I think it's not being talked about enough as an underwhelming grouping is what the USC class did this year. Now, I understand that they did get 3 5-star recruits, Malachi Nelson. They got Zachariah Branch, and they also got Maki Lemon, who's a 5-star receiver, 2 guys from California. But separate from that, they finished 15th. And they only got 7 4-star commits to go along with those 3 5-stars. So not a very deep class, which is really weird. I think what's more concerning, and I said this in a quick hit video following yesterday, that it's really concerning to lose a guy like Uwe Ungalale, who was one of the top-rated players in the state of California, literally in your backyard at St. John Bosco, which is not that far away. I know it takes 3 hours with traffic because of the 405, but still not that far away from the University of Southern California. To lose him to Oregon, I think is a little concerning. And I know that Lincoln Riley is a fantastic coach, but it feels like at times he's very inconsistent with recruiting, especially with getting these top-rated defensive players. And we saw how freaking bad they were on defense this year. I think it's not a massive red flag, but some cause for concern that needs to be acknowledged for USC. It's not getting talked about.
Well, and that's going to be the breaking point for USC, in my opinion, right? Like they're going to be a good team. They're going to be a double-digit win team every year and have an explosive offense. But this was the same struggle that Lincoln Riley found while he was at Oklahoma, right? It's like your offense is explosive every single year, but then your defense is just never one that you can trust under Alex Grinch. Like they're just not a team that in the biggest games that you can depend on to get a key stop or to slow down a potent offense. It's just not what their defense has been built upon. I mean, because like you said, Joe, they still got Malachi Nelson and Lemon and Zachariah Branch, who apparently is Cliff Branch's grandson, by the way. I just found that note the other day, who was a great wide receiver for the LA Raiders back in the day. But, I mean, they're always going to have offense, man. Oklahoma's always going to be able to do that. And USC now is also going to be always going to be able to do that under Lincoln Riley, excuse me. The question, though, to your point, Joe, is that you need to recruit defensively well, And you need to be able to develop defensively better than you have in your time together with him and Alex Grinch. And that's going to be the question, though, moving forward. They tried some quick fixes this past offseason on defense with some transfers. Didn't really turn out great. So we'll see if there's some development that could happen. But I agree. I think they definitely need to recruit defense a lot better moving forward.
Yeah, for whatever reason, I just feel like they just don't have the greatest just eye for seeing defensive talent or projecting defensive talent, especially in that front seven positions, right? I mean, we're talking just the end position, the defensive tackle, linebacker position, like we see so many of these other schools. I mean, when we get to Georgia and Alabama, I mean, the guys they've recruited in this class right now maybe are, day one starters at a lot of these schools that we're discussing. But, the interesting thing really with USC is just he leaves Oklahoma to go to USC. Now that, attractiveness has kind of died down a little bit. You have other guys like Deion Sanders who have come into the mix now, who have kind of taken away, all that focus and spotlight elsewhere. And it's really just going to be a testament to this coaching staff when they transition into the Big Ten. What do they do to kind of change a little bit of their philosophy? Does going to the Big Ten allow them to recruit different kids in different areas that maybe they didn't look at before, right? To view a certain player or body type in a different light when they go into this conference? Because I think they're going to be surprised by the physicality of the Big Ten, just like we discussed about Ohio State a week ago. It's like they're going to put up points, no doubt. I think they'll be surprised, though, how teams like Iowa rush for 200 yards on them randomly, and it's like they're going to be very confused by this when it's like Iowa is below us as far as the totem pole goes. But yeah, for whatever reason, we can't dominate them physically. So I think their introduction into the Big Ten will allow them to review a little bit of their philosophy of how they see their team and their toughness and physicality going forward to add to that, just lightning fast, quick strike ability on the offensive side of the football.
They need a lot more bulk if they're going to be able to
totally
go blow for blow with an Iowa, with a Minnesota, with a Nebraska. It's a very different style of football, and I think that Lincoln's going to need to figure that out. And again, something for concern that not enough people were really bringing up. I know that Georgia and Alabama fans, though, are not concerned because they both had massive hauls. We're going to talk about Alabama in a second because their class is stupid good. But first, I just want to quickly hit on Georgia because they had the second best class. They had a really talented grouping. They pulled Damon Wilson, who was one of the top edge rushers in the class, and he was a late signing. A.J. Harris, who's one of the top corners, a five-star kid. And then we've talked so much about guys like Samuel Mpemba, Raylan Wilson, Monroe Freeling, Troy Bowles, Jordan Hall. There are so many talented guys in this class, and I think far and away, we talked about this on the preview show. I don't think it needs much over analysis, but they're building this roster the way that they've done it in the past. They're not straying off of it. They're not getting caught up in the need to maybe go and get every single five-star that they can. Instead, they're getting guys that fit the scheme. They're building up front. They're building defensively. And we know damn well that works because they won a national championship with it last year, and they're about to win a back-to-back one this upcoming year with the same roster construction. So, Matt, I want to kick it to you first. What do you think of this Georgia class?
To me, and I don't know if this is like a super bold statement, but I switched the ranking. I put Georgia at number one. When I go through their list of players and I watch their film and I look at the team that they currently have, I feel like Georgia refueled a little bit better than Alabama. I mean, and you kind of just mentioned it. I mean, here's the defensive line they pulled in. I mean, Damon Wilson, Mpemba, Hall, Harris, Jarrett. I mean, 6'4", 230, 6'3", 240, 6'4", 300, 6'4", 237, 6'6", 340. I mean, big, strong, physical people that play a physical brand of football. Like, I don't know, that gets me excited. As a former Tennessee guy, I like what Georgia's doing, right? And then the tight end position, Pierce Sperling and Lawson Lucky. I mean, we didn't talk about Lawson Lucky on our tight end show, but this dude is scary good. He really is. He's 6'3", 225. He moves well. He still looks like he's a young man that's like awkwardly growing into his body. So like, wow, tight end position, crushed it. Then you talk about the two transfers that they got. Ra Thomas and Dominic Lovett, both leading receivers from their previous teams of, what was it, Mississippi State, and Missouri.
Yep.
So, like, I mean, I don't know, man. I know that Alabama got the number one knock because of all the other stuff in the rankings, but Georgia found what they needed to find. They replenished their team to a whole nother level. And every guy that we just listed, we talked about all year this year. I mean, just like dogs and football players. Wow, no pun intended with that dogs, but you know what I'm saying? Like, just like overall, just football players that can do multiple, positive things for your program.
I mean, we talked about it on the show before signing day. This is just the Georgia formula, man. Getting guys like John Jarrett at 6'6", 340, like you said, Matt. Getting guys like Jordan Hall, who's 6'4.5", 300 pounds. AJ Harris, a corner who's 6'1" with long arms. Like, they're just continue to get length and athletic and explosiveness everywhere on the field. Samuel Mpemba, Raylan Wilson, they just have those types of guys that at their respective positions, they bring either length or speed or both in a lot of instances, right? Which is just, this is how this team has been formulated over the last few years. When you talk about guys like Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter and Devontae Wyatt and Tyson Campbell and Eric Stokes at corner, this is this team that they've had. Haley Ringo now at corner, and this is the Georgia formula. They're sticking to it very extensively. And like you said, they also got a couple nice transfer wide receivers. I mean, especially Dominic Lovett, who out of Missouri, I mean, he was the best wide receiver on a team that had the number one wide receiver from the 2022 class as a freshman last year. So you look at what they were able to do. It might not be the flashy class comparative to an Alabama, but it's the class that's going to get stuff done, right? Like some of these guys are a little bit under, like John Jarrett's not an incredibly highly rated kid, but you know that 6'6", 340 under this defensive system, he's going to be a player eventually, right? Like, he definitely is going to be. So continue to develop, continue to coach, continue to formulate and just construct your roster the way that you have been successful at. I think Georgia, again, continues to get stronger.
And even the linebacking core, too. Raylan Wilson, Troy Bowles, C.J. Allen. I mean, like, we're talking about guys that when we reviewed their film, just like can do a little of everything extremely well. And I think that's what I'm attracted to when I look at this Georgia unit, is that they have a lot of guys that do great things on all three phases for a lot of the football teams: receiver, special teams, and defense. I mean, and even Jonel Aguero, I believe I'm pronouncing his name correctly, the Massachusetts boy, he's a steal. He's a very good safety / football player. I don't know what he is exactly at the next level. But again, I love the fact of just the well-roundedness of this crew and the size. You can't really, listen, size matters in the SEC, and their defensive line is going to be big. It's going to be hard to move, and they're adding more depth to it, which is always important.
Football is a big man's game at the end of the day, man.
No doubt.
We want to avoid it. We want to try to change the narrative in the passing era that we're in, but the best teams are still teams that are built through the defensive and offensive lines and are good at the quarterback position. Like, those are the teams that win. So Georgia continuing to strengthen the front seven of their defense, continuing to strengthen the front five of their offensive line.
Right.
Just continue to do it, man. Because we even talk about Monroe Freely, who might be the best athlete of any offensive tackle in the class as well.
Totally. Yeah. I know. I get distracted by the defensive side of the football with them, but you're right. And Monroe is a fantastic football player.
Yep.
Yeah, they really, really hit on trying to build that roster the way that they've done it. And again, it's kind of like you talked about, Matt, going under the radar because they have less 5 stars than Alabama does. But we got to acknowledge the 2 days that Alabama had, because what they did, what Nick Saban did, is nuts. He is out here running laps around some of the other SEC teams the way that he's out here recruiting. Not only did he get a massive haul of 5 stars, way more than the next highest team, he also went out and made a point to flip as many of the top guys as possible before signing day, make some last-second adjustments to decisions on big-name players, and some of those names that we're talking about that are 5 stars. They got Caleb Downs, who's the top safety in the class. They flipped Keon Keeley, who we mentioned earlier from Notre Dame early on in the cycle. They flipped Caden Proctor, who was a foregone conclusion to go to Iowa because he's from Des Moines, Iowa. They also got James Smith, another 5-star defensive lineman, Qua Rusa, a 5-star edge, And then I think the crown jewel of this grouping, separate from the fact that they have a 5-star running back in Justice Haynes, Desmond Ricks, who a reclassified kid in this group, was supposed to go to LSU, decides to stick with Bama to play with his brother Eli. This is a massive get to add to the grouping. And some people were saying going into this, into yesterday, if they got Desmond Ricks, that was going to make them the second greatest recruiting class of all time behind that Texas A&M grouping last year. And I've got a lot more faith in Nick Saban to develop these kids and keep them on the roster than I do with Jimbo Fisher. This haul, just in general, is stupid. And the crazy thing is most of these guys that I just talked about are probably going to play right away and have impacts pretty early on. Nick Saban wasn't messing around. People were saying he should retire. Instead, he says, not so fast. We're gearing up for one more run, potentially in the next couple of years.
Weren't you one of those people that said he should retire?
Ryan, we're not doing this right now. I simply brought up the discussion point of people talking about it, but he proved me wrong. My opinions are allowed to change. That's how conversations work.
You're
just being a good host. That's what you're doing, Joe.
Yes.
All right. Don't let Ryan
asking questions and getting answers.
Yeah,
that's
man.
right.
Yeah, man. Well, I'll say this. They got positions that they needed to hit on this cycle. We've talked about the mass exodus at wide receiver this offseason with guys like JoJo Early and Trayshawn Holden and those guys leaving. Anderson, who was a freshman this year. Getting a guy like a Jalen Hale out of Texas, I think, was big time for them. They also got the number 1 junior college transfer wide receiver, Malik Benson, which I think is going to play big dividends for them as well. But I mean, Joe, I talked about the important positions in football. You mentioned Caden Proctor at offensive tackle, who's an Iowa kid, bred and has been one he was in the Iowa class for a long time. Able to flip him after getting a late visit from him, a late official right before signing day, is big time. I mean, he's 6'7", 330 pounds of just behemoth. And then you get guys like Keon Keeley, who was already 6'6 plus, 240 plus pounds, still, for my money's worth, is the best player in the class, bar none, in my opinion. Get Caleb Downs, who's the top safety in the class, in my opinion, as well. James Smith was a big player for them late in the process, 6'3", 310 pounds. I mean, I think that, in my opinion, Desmond Ricks might be a little overrated when we're talking about the 5-star billing. But, I mean, overall, man, hard to push back against this group. They loaded at the premier positions that you need to load up at.
Yeah, and I think one thing, obviously, just because I'm the quarterback of this group, right? I mean, the good thing to keep in mind, too, is that Alabama did a good job of replenishing the quarterback room again. That has been an issue for them, is that, they get guys in, but they can't really seem to kind of keep the room solid at all times, right? So they need depth at that position always, right? And you saw it this year with a few teams that just quarterback depth is always important. I love Eli Holston, what he's done so far. I mean, he's 6'4", 220 pounds. He's a, body that's ready to play now at that Division I level. I do think that he's a good decision maker. He's not great yet, but also I think that's just being in an environment of a high school offense that maybe doesn't really dissect defenses the way they should on the next level. He throws the ball well down the field and has a strong arm. And I think he's going to be a good guy that can, again, project very well going forward a year or two from now to potentially being the starter. So I like his overall mobility and athleticism, in that position of being a big, strong quarterback. And then the other one is Dylan Lonergan, who I was impressed with. I thought did an extremely good job this past year. He rips it pretty well. I think he needs to just learn how to let go of the football a little bit more to play on that SEC level, but he makes good decisions. He plays the quarterback position well. He moves well in the pocket. So I think they did a good job of replenishing the quarterback room, for one. The other aspect of it is just like we discussed with Georgia. I mean, just the edge players and the interior defensive line has been, I think, something that was a little bit below average for Alabama's liking this season. And the reason why they had somewhat of a down year is because some teams actually just push them around physically. And I think with these guys, I think really the two biggest steals, right, of this class, right, is Pierre, the one edge rusher. Then you have Rousseau, and then Smith. I think those three guys are just the guys that add depth that maybe, obviously Smith being the 5-star and super popular, but those three names together, I think just add another rotation of defensive linemen to their team that can play right away. And the fact that they were able to convince both the Carver boys to commit to Alabama, I think is huge because both of them are ballers. And I think they can play multiple positions in that Nick Saban defense.
I love the quarterback note too, Matt, because I agree. I think Eli Holstein has a lot of talent as a pure pocket quarterback, right? Like he's got a cannon for an arm. Dylan Lonergan's a really interesting player. I think there's a lot of development potential there. But the note on him is that he is also a really good baseball player who might get drafted in the first round of this year's draft. So Alabama might never see him, but if they do, and he's developed, he could be a good one as well. So Alabama loaded up on key positions that you need to be successful at. Shut up, Joe. Shut up.
No, it's good. You're right, though. And I mean, in Holston, I mean, they say with Dylan, that he throws like in the mid 90s. So that's, that he has arm talent, right? I mean, that was something that obviously people always discuss with Patrick Mahomes being a well-rounded multi-sport athlete and being a great baseball player. So that's always good, But yeah, Eli Holston, don't deny his running ability, though. There were a few runs of like 50 or more in his highlights where he's like accelerating pretty aggressive. I mean, dude's 6'4", so he's taking big strides. Like, let's be real. Yep. Now, hey, do I expect him to do it in the SEC right away? No, but the ability to at least be a threat on the ground is always a good thing.
The final thing, just to wrap our thoughts on this Alabama class, the funniest part about the grouping is that the lowest rated kid that they have, everyone else is a 4-star recruiter or higher. The lowest rated they have is a kicker who's a 3-star kicker. And those who don't understand specialist recruiting, these sites don't give kickers higher than a 3-star. So that is the lowest rated kid that they have in this class. So Nick Saban, pissed off, excited, got the best group that he could. And they are gearing right back up for maybe not next season to go right back into the hunt, which they still will be a part of this discussion. But this class is going to set them up for success when these kids are redshirt freshmen or sophomores and are ready to go. Folks, thanks for tuning in. At Joe DeLeone, at Rise and Draft, at Sims Complete QB. We'll be back with more. Make sure you're subscribed and you don't miss out, as we're going to be transitioning eventually to the 2024 class of recruits. Enjoy the rest of your week, folks. We'll be back with more.